here we can already see the first structure. This was a machine gun bunker, especially built for that purpose. Over there, supposedly the embrasure, and as you can see, the roof has collapsed. Worth mentioning is this specific section of reinforced trench that they built here. But let's continue. Today we're going to be talking about a country that so often gets critically overlooked when talking about World War I, Switzerland. When World War I broke out, Switzerland had already been prepared with some fortifications along the most critical border sections, mostly in the north or south of the country, where in northwestern Switzerland, and this is Fortification Hauenstein. Already in 1906, the then appointed General Swiss Army Theophil von Sprecher warned about the imminent threat of a possible invasion on Switzerland, and with World War I on the horizon, this threat suddenly became very real. What might be interesting to hear in that context, the Swiss never planned with a German attack on or through Switzerland, not at all. They rather expected a French or an Italian attack on Swiss territory. So, why is that? Well, back in the day, in 1914, as you probably all know, Alsace-Lorraine belonged to the German Empire, and as we all know, the French desperately wanted it back. So the Swiss army pretty much expected the French army to cross Switzerland and to attack Alsace-Lorraine through Switzerland. And the same goes for the Italian army, because they really wanted to take South Tyrol. So therefore, Swiss army planners expected the Italian army to attack South Tyrol through Switzerland, specifically through the Umbrail area that we've already seen. Well, what that strategic planning led to was, for example, this Fortifikation Hauenstein, a network of kilometers of trenches and bunkers. Specifically here in this small sector were 34 kilometers of trenches excavated and around 500 concrete structures. Just by the way, I grew up pretty close to here So I've known this very place from a very young age on, and I can assure you back then, some 20 or more years ago, these trenches were filled with earth, leaf litter and so on. So you could only see the parapet of the trenches, and that was basically it. So beautiful that they have been restored. Now, you might ask, why were these trenches built specifically here? We are on the so-called Bölchen Massif, a mountain range with the city, the border city of Basel to the north, and the city of Olten to the south. And Olten, even back then and nowadays as well, is the most important railway junction of Switzerland. So they wanted to protect the Swiss railways from possible attacks, and that's basically the whole reason why this mountain range here was fortified to such an extent. If you look here, this might appear familiar, even thinking about the trenches in the Vosges Mountains. A striking similarity with the Swiss, with the German trenches in the Vosges, even with the inscription. Here it says Sapper, so engineer, depot, company 422, 1914. Beautiful. Here, these niches, probably for ammo storage. Well, let's talk about the construction of this massive fortified area here. The general mobilization was ordered on August 3rd, 1914, and within hours work began on pre-drawn plans around the clock. Militia soldiers, civilians, and even Italian guest workers put in 2 million man-hours to the construction. Look at this beauty. Sapper Company 422, 1914. By mid-November 1914, the infantry works, foot and field batteries were roughly complete, and 3 group strong points were combat ready. If you look at this, here we have a beautiful combination of trench building. We have natural rock, which is abundant here in the area, but also reinforced concrete. Just amazing. There you can see it better. So striking similarities with German trenches in the Vosges Mountains. Here, once again, we have some sort of storage compartments. Here's a tunnel going through. Well, we're not going to be doing that. Here you can more or less see how I remember these trenches up here. Just have a look at this very rough terrain. Here we are on a pretty rocky and exposed mountain ridge. So you can imagine building trench networks up here was quite an achievement. You can see where the tunnel, here you can see where the tunnel that we've seen before comes out. Here, this depression here once was a trench. When I told you about the fortified sector, you can imagine all these mountain peaks being at least fortified with an observation post, and a little bit further down off the ridges and peaks were artillery batteries positioned. So this area here, even though it doesn't appear like it from a distance, was heavily fortified. And just by the way, this started in World War I, but up here there are even tank barricades from World War II, World War II bunkers, not many, but a few, and even Cold War bunkers. So you can see the strategic importance of this mountain range. Here also once was a section of trench, and here we have once again these concrete dugouts. Here's even this curve of a former trench. Here's the next one. So you can more or less imagine how this trench ran along here. You might be asking, well, all around here, this whole former sector is surrounded by farms. What happened with the farmers? Well, this defensive sector was declared military exclusion zone, and the garrison was planned for around 45,000 men. Within this exclusion zone was more or less the same number of inhabitants, mostly farmers. So that was quite a challenge, mostly for the farmers, of course, but apparently it worked out. And by the way, as I said, this garrison was planned for 45,000 men, including 6,500 horses. If I'm not totally wrong, 130 artillery pieces hoisted up here. And they even constructed around 25 kilometers of more or less paved road. So the most roads that still exist around here, nowadays mostly forest roads, were actually military roads. Here you can see once again what remains of former trenches. You can see one running along here. And you can beautifully see now the trenches were built all along these natural ridges to always have, well, how should I say, height superiority. It is absolutely noteworthy that the surrounding hills and forests still contain former trenches, but they are mostly collapsed. Well, they basically don't exist anymore. Here you can now beautifully see the ridge of the mountain that we're going to walk along, because over there is one very special feature of this sector that I want to show you. Probably you remember my video on kilometer zero. At kilometer zero actually is around 40 kilometers or 50 in that direction, so you can already see the tactical importance of this very mountain here. Now let's get to the strategic overview, just to make clear why these trenches and bunkers were positioned the way they are. If we have a look around here, we've just come from over there. And if we have a look around, this mountain here is the only elevation around with a more or less flat top, if you know what I mean. So if an army wanted to invade through Switzerland, through this exact area, they would have had to cross this exact mountain pass. And that's exactly the place where they would have been ultimately stopped by the Swiss army. Regarding the Swiss concerns of a possible attack, as you know from watching my videos, the French, they attacked Alsace, German Alsace and Lorraine back then, directly in the Vosges Mountains, pretty horizontally, so to say. So These positions here obviously were never used because the French certainly knew that the Swiss were up to something in these very hills, and they also knew that attacking Switzerland would yield no gain at all because Switzerland had the topographic advantage, especially around or along the borders with France, Germany, and to the south with Italy and back then Austria-Hungary. So all these surrounding superpowers most certainly knew that they would bite their teeth out at least for some serious time. So Switzerland maintained neutrality, and that's exactly what the army commander in 1914, Ulrich Wille, emphasized. The most important thing for him, although he had very good connections to the German Empire and German military staff, but still, he pointed out that Swiss neutrality must be maintained under any circumstance. So these positions are a perfect example of how Switzerland maintained its neutrality. Here you can get a glimpse of how the terrain looks. We're now standing on a rock formation which goes down approximately 200 meters. Here you can barely see the surrounding villages and farms that were incorporated into the military exclusion zone. So we have just come from over there, and here's already the next trench, although in a far worse state than the trenches we've seen before. Just right here, maybe you can spot it. Along here ran a trench, and over there's a concrete construction that we're going to have a look at in a bit. And in front of that trench that ran here was a barbed wire entanglement, because the Swiss did it the same way as the Germans. In front of the trench parapet, they installed a barbed wire entanglement, something around 10 meters in width. So they also had a field of fire, of course. Such a rough terrain. Imagine having to fight here. But to be quite honest, the Vosges Mountains were quite often similar, if not worse. I'm just talking about topography, of course. So, somewhere just right there ran the trench along. You can barely guess where it was. And just something around 30 meters behind that trench, it went down. Now we're approaching the second ridge, because there's something pretty special. As of what I know, over there, on this lower part of the ridge, there apparently also was at one point an artillery piece installed, as well as of course down in the valley, because when the Swiss positioned an artillery battery, it mostly consisted of 4 to 6 pieces, if I'm not totally wrong, back in World War I, of course. So they made sure that they could cover the whole area with artillery if necessary. Now we're getting up here to this rock formation. Because right here the army positioned a spotlight electric powered. Of course, Swiss didn't spare a dime, or rather a franc, and of course they electrified this sector up here. Considering it was 1914, quite an achievement, I must say. So with that spotlight installed here, they could cover this area here, the sector just in front of the trench that ran straight onto the ridge of that other mountain. If you don't mind, I'm not gonna throw the Swiss German names for all these hills. So it would rather be confusing than anything else. We're getting close. Here you can already see another section of trench, which, well, just ran along here, but here you can see they cut it directly into the solid rock. Over here, it continues once again through into the rock. We're now closing in on our destination. Here's once again a spotlight position pretty similar to the one we've seen before, but our main point of interest is this structure right here. This is the observation post WWI. If I had to translate this name in English, it would be Leak Meadow. And if we have a look around here, it makes perfect sense that this observation post was positioned right here. Before we go in, let's check out how it looks from the outside. Here is a rifle gallery to flank this observation post against possible attacks from down here. And what's particularly interesting about this building is it's multi-story, and it even has to do something with railways. Here's the concrete superstructure. And the cupola. And here, finally, we can have a look at the surrounding area, because up here I can show you something crucial. Because of the weather, it's a little bit foggy over there, but in exactly this direction, also approximately 50 kilometers or so, is already the Hauptmannsweiler Kopf. And kilometer 0, as I've pointed out before, is approximately over there, some 40-50 kilometers. Over there, just around 15 or 20 kilometers, is already the Rhine, which forms the border between Switzerland and Germany. So with that in mind, I hope you're understanding the importance of these positions right here. Before we go into this bunker, can you spot what's wrong with this cupola? Because if you think of, for example, Austro-Hungarian cupolas, or the ones at the Maginot Line, or maybe the ones from German fortifications in nowadays Alsace, well, what doesn't belong here are the rivets, because there's a funny story to this cupola. Well, back then, back in World War I, Switzerland didn't have a very big weapon industry at all. Unlike Austria-Hungary with Skoda, or the German Empire with Krupp, that didn't exist in Switzerland, so they had to be pretty pragmatic. So this cupola you see here actually is a boiler of a locomotive, because normal fortress cupolas would have been, well, cast. And this one, you can clearly see it bent steel sheets riveted together. These bullet holes, so to say, they are of course not from wartime, but I'm assuming some people had some playtime over here, because up here you're very remote, and if you fool around up here with your army weapon, nobody cares. Well, as I said, boiler of a locomotive. They just added these slits and put this piece in place here. One more thing worth mentioning about this observation post, of course, it offered a clear view on the area of the Rhine Valley down below over there, but the gun embrasures are positioned to this direction. Sadly, because of the forest, we can't see it right now, but we've come from the ridge over there with the trenches, walked along the other ridge here, and now we're again on the ridge, and between these two, or rather three ridges, there's this huge plain that we've seen before, and the Swiss calculated that way. If an enemy wanted to attack this specific area, the only way up here was through that plain. So with the trenches and observation post here and the trenches on the other side, a possible attacker could have been eliminated in no time. Now let's check out the observation post. As you can see, it's quite rocky. Now, here it says observation post Lauchweid, Sapper Battalion 322, 1914. Here we have this rifle gallery. And some idiots didn't know how to behave. The rifle gallery goes around here. There's even some sort of window with the wooden frame still in place. Here you have, or you had, a beautiful view. If you look at the details of this building, it's striking. As much as I know, it's a combination of bricks and concrete. And here it goes up to the cupola. We're on the second story now. There's an embrasure. This could have been maybe window, emergency exit or something like that. And we're inside the boiler. From up here, they would have watched for a possible enemy to attack. But as we know, nobody came. There's even some sort of ventilation. It's just beautiful. You can see the steel rail, even with the bolts. Maybe they had some sort of sliding door. I don't know. The angled embrasure, beautiful. And also the door hinge. What a beautiful place. What happened after 1918 with these positions? Well, they were dismantled, the trenches were filled in, former artillery positions were restored to pasture, so they pretty much mostly restored the land to its original conditions. Well, this very position is one of three major defensive positions alongside Murten and Bellinzona, and well, all three were dismantled because, of course, after World War I there was no use for those positions at all. During and after World War II, locals became interested in the remains that were still sleeping in the surrounding forests, and some people, more or less as a hobby, began excavating and restoring them. And you might also think that these positions are some sort of national Swiss heritage that is protected in some sort. Well, the Fortification Hauenstein, where we're currently at, wasn't protected until 2018. Just imagine that, because all major Swiss fortifications such as bunkers or whatnot, they are protected under Swiss heritage law, but this position for a very long time wasn't. Specifically until 100 years after World War I. And there's finally some section of trench, because never forget, I gotta be walking the trenches. So this trench beautifully portrays what I told you before. It was flanking this meadow, and on the other side there would have been the other trenches, so possible attackers could have been eliminated here. Here you can see the trench running up to the observation post we've just been. And here's a beautiful example of trench cut directly into the limestone rock, which is pretty abundant here. So, yeah. Heroes in the trenches. Now we're heading back to where we started, but there's still a topic worth talking about, and that is Switzerland was never really at war, and they didn't have any experience. And also an important thing to consider, they didn't have a taxation system as we have nowadays in Switzerland. So how were these military expenses financed? Well, through custom taxes and through so-called war bonds. But what did that lead to? Well, of course, it led to a hyperinflation, which even caused lots of social unrest, which brought Switzerland at the brink of a civil war in 1918, comparable to the German Empire, but that's another story. So these military installations cost an estimated 26 billion Swiss francs, adjusted for inflation, of course. So you can take the same figure for euros or dollars, more or less. And even considering that Swiss population back then was at around 3.8 million. So Switzerland did take some serious measures to defend its neutrality. Another topic worth talking about is the following. Back then, a huge majority of the Swiss servicemen that were drafted were, of course, farmers, factory workers, and so on. But back then, in the First World War, in the army they had a pretty comfortable life, so to say. They had an average of 400 grams of meat per day and 4,000 calories per day, whereas in civil life they would have eaten meat, if at all, once a week. But as I said, if at all. With the Swiss army drafting the farmers, factory workers, teachers, and so on, well, manual labor had to be done by their wives. And then in 1917 and 18, the Swiss economy nearly collapsed. And as I teased it a little bit, Switzerland was on the brink of a civil war. So pretty rough times back then, because the Swiss inhabitants were fed with food stamps and they had to collect sometimes their own food. So there was even irregular hunting in the forest, of course, berry picking, or potatoes and vegetables were stolen from farmers. Yeah, rough times. Here, by the way, is the spot where the trench system begins. We have already been up there because of what I've told you. You can imagine food was the most important motivator that the Swiss army could offer back in the day. I really hope that this short exploration was interesting for you. If so, please leave a comment with your thoughts. A like and or subscription to my small channel would be highly appreciated. Have a wonderful week and see you. Bye.